Yes, right, okie dokie. So this one is an airbrushing video, and like you see in the bottom, and we're going to base coat the marine that I airbrushed the primer onto. So I wanted to give you a basic idea of, how to prime with an airbrush. It's quite simple, but one thing I did want to do as well is I am going to use, if it focuses, the McCraig Blue base coat that we get from the Warhammer Conquest magazine. Because another question I had was about preparing your paints for going through an airbrush. Now Citadel, and like I've said before, is my Vallejo. They do airbrush paints and they're already thin. They should theoretically go straight through your airbrush without thinning them, and they're ready to go. But this stuff isn't. This stuff will clog it up straight away. But you can use it in your airbrush just by using an airbrush thinner. You can thin it down to around about skimmed milk and so on. So yeah, I thought, well, at the same time I'll show you how it's possible to use any regular paint and get it through your airbrushes. It's really quite simple. You just make sure you get it right, otherwise you'll end up clogging your airbrush up and you won't be able to use it. So yeah, we'll grab the marine, stick it in the booth, and get it airbrushed. Okie dokie then, and we're going to try narrating over this to try and make it a bit easier. I know that the airbrush booth can be a bit of a pain to record for. So you see I've got the base paint, and I've got the airbrush. I've got my pipette handy to get the paint out of the pot, because it's difficult to pour paint from a Citadel pot. The airbrush thinner of course is very important, and I've also got the old brush handy. And don't forget, obviously, give your paints a really good shape before you use them. And I scrape the tongue on the back there like I did in the brush base coating video. And so I grab the pipette. It can be quite difficult to get the paint into the pipette just due to how thick it is. It's not like picking up water with a pipette that just sucks up into the pipette quite easily. And you see here I have to actually try and fiddle around with the bulb on the end there just to get the pressure to suck up the paint. And the amount of paint you need to use is a lot less than you would think, by about half. If you're using pre-made airbrush paint, you might add a few drops of that in. But because we're going to be thinning this down almost 50-50, if not more, you need less paint than you would normally need. So we've got the base paint in the cup, we've got some thinner in the cup, and then I grab an old brush, which I don't mind about the paint getting into the ferrule on this brush. It's an old brush, and I just mix the paint up in the cup. And I use the side of the cup just to check the consistency, just to see if it looks about right. Like I said, around about skimmed milk. Of course, the closer to water you can get it, the better. But the trouble is with that is, if it's too thin, it won't stick properly. And I gave it a little bit of a wipe onto the bit of paper I've got in as a sort of protector, just to check the consistency. And I'm giving it a bit of a backflow because I want to make sure there's no thick paint right at the bottom there. Maybe the brush didn't quite catch any of it, so make sure that that's mixed in nicely. And then, like the primer video, I give it a quick test onto the surface there just to make sure it's flowing nice and smoothly. And then it's just a case of just applying it to the model. Again, unlike a rattle can, we can do this in long presses. But there's quite an important way of using an airbrush in terms of how you engage your paint. You engage the air before you pull back on the trigger to use the to allow the paint to come through, and likewise when you finish, you release the paint, so you stop the paint from flowing before you stop the air from flowing. And this basically just helps prevent tip dry. If you've got the air flowing while if you've got the paint flowing while the air's flowing, you could dry the paint at the end. It's just important just to stop the paint before you stop the air. And we can just go around the model, and like I said, just don't spray for too long in one area. And you'll see that I'll actually go around the model twice this way round, The paint is quite thin. I wouldn't say it's too thin, but it's on the verge of being too thin, I think. But there's a knack to thinning your paints, and eventually you'll get there. I mean, like I said, airbrushing it does have quite a learning curve to it, and you know, it's going to take some time. I've only been airbrushing myself for say 6 months or so properly, so you know, even I'm still learning. And so I'll go around the model, and I'm actually going to go around it twice. You know, with the air that's flowing out of the airbrush onto the model, including the paint that you're throwing onto it, you'll find that the paint dries a lot quicker than it does with a regular brush. And so I'm just going around it, making sure that I've got all of the bits and pieces from every angle that I can think of. It's just bearing in mind, obviously, you know, I'll say it again later, you know, the paint flows in one direct line, so it goes from a straight line from the brush to the model. So you just got to try and make sure that the airbrush has got line of sight. And then, as always, I'm going to show you this again, even though I showed you it in the priming video, but it's really important to clean your airbrush out. Airbrushing is expensive, and the last thing you want to do is the first few times you pick your airbrush up, you end up not cleaning it properly. So I've dumped out the paint that I didn't use into this pot here. I gave the brush a bit of a clean as well, and then essentially all I'm doing is I just rinse it out multiple times until that water runs clear. You'll see how much water I use when I'm doing this, because you can see that the level of the water rises. But once the water is clear, I then back flush the water, and you can see just how much extra paint comes out of that, even though the water was running clear from the cup. And so it's very important. You really do need to make sure. Most of the problems that come with an airbrush is because it's clogged. You'll find it if you're having problems with your airbrush, it's probably because it's not clean. It's probably not because you brought a dud airbrush. It's probably because it's not clean. So you know, I've given it a good wash out with water, and it's virtually clean. There's no paint left in it. So I'm going to put the lid back onto the airbrush cleaning station, and I have some specific airbrush cleaner, which I'm now going to run through the airbrush as well, and that helps break down any paint that might be left and some of those little bits left, and then give it a run through with some plain water again to rinse out the airbrush cleaner. And then that's a nice clean airbrush, and I could now put another colour in there, and I can then carry on painting something completely different. And there we have it. That is one primed Space Marine. Sorry, one base coated Space Marine. I've already primed it. So yeah, he's done. So we'll close this video down now, I reckon. Alright. And there we go, you see. Look at that. Nice and painted, lovely and smooth. He's now nice and dry. I did do it twice. If you want to see that in real time, feel free to rewind the video and watch it again. But essentially I did exactly the same thing. I added some more paint to the brush, I thinned it, used my paintbrush to mix it up a bit of a backwash just to make sure that we've got no thick paint inside there. Maybe it might have been pushed down by the brush. And yeah, and then just went over the thing again. I did it twice. The great thing about airbrushing, using your airbrush to base coat, it dries really quickly. So perhaps, I mean, doing one model, you might have to put it to one side to dry. But if you're doing a squad of maybe 5 or even 10 guys, I mean, we get 3 in the Conquest magazine at a time, or certainly so far. So you might get to the end of the 3 and it's dry, ready for starting again to do it again. And then by the time you've done all 3 of them twice, you move them over to your painting area if you've got it separate, and then he's ready for the next step, which is washing. So we'll get on with that. I also find that actually it's quite easy to get a nice smooth coat with an airbrush. It's why I've got one. One, it's quicker, and two, it's nice and easy to get a really smooth coat. There are downsides to airbrushing, of course, is that trying to get into all of the nooks and crannies sometimes. If an airbrush, you're looking down, if you're trying to look underneath the model, if you can't get an angle on it, the paint comes in a straight line, and you can only get your airbrush so close. So if you can't get an angle to actually see a part of the model, your airbrush won't be able to get to it. With Space Marines it's fairly simple, but I mean there could be some bigger models and so on and so forth, or even smaller ones that you can't quite get the angle to get the airbrush into it. Which obviously, but even then, even if you do get to a point with that, you're airbrushing most of it, and then you've got to a bit where you've missed, you just get a paintbrush and just touch it up. So I find it quicker anyway, and it's easier. Especially when you're doing lots and lots of models. But the downside is, as I said in the previous video, airbrushing is expensive to begin with. It's not cheap to get into airbrushing. But once you're in there, it's probably not. It's only a touch more expensive than regular painting, because you buy your thinner and your cleaner. But I mean, those bottles, they last a reasonably long time. So it's only marginally more expensive to maintain airbrush painting. And on top of that, you do need to get in there with some brush painting as well. So I don't know. I mean, again, like I said, these videos are just my experience given to you. You can choose how much of it you want to follow or not. It's up to you. But that's airbrushing for basic airbrushing, basically. We'll carry on with this model. We've got the other. If you've seen the other videos of base coating miniatures, which is this guy. I've now got both of them. I'm going to paint them both as ultramarines, and I'll paint them both with slightly different techniques, so I've got some decent videos. Yeah, I mean, this guy I did with the brush, so you'll be able to see that, and I'll use brush techniques with this one. This guy was with the airbrush. I don't need to do any more airbrushing with this guy, but I'll see if I can use some slightly different techniques in terms of painting from this one, and then you can mix and match however you like. But yeah, that's airbrushing, alright? So hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and I really hope you have. So if you did, please give me a thumbs up for it. It's more of a case of it kind of helps me gauge how well I'm doing with these videos, if you like them or not. Also, if you want to see some more from me, obviously hit the subscribe button, and if you don't want to miss any of my videos, go ahead and press the bell button next to the subscribe button. Alright, so I do thank you for watching this one, and if you have any spare time, feel free to peruse the social media I've got down there, Twitter, Facebook, and if you want to support the channel, Patreon's down there as well, but that's entirely up to you, to peruse at your leisure. So yeah, thank you for watching this one, and I'll catch you in the next one, alright? Ta-ra.